Okay, so now we're going to talk about um, a very important skill that will help you both scanning and skimming, but it's more important for scanning, which is paraphrasing. Okay, so paraphrasing is the ability to say the same thing in different ways, like whether we're talking about different words, different sentence structure, or different grammar. We're going to use it in a lot of sections, a lot of parts of the IELTS exam, but now we're going to see how we can use that to our advantage in the reading part. And you need to know that if you're not able to paraphrase properly, you will not be able to get more than 6 or 5.5 in the reading. Um, so let's start with the fallacies, like the trap, basically. Very commonly used trap, okay? So if you look for the exact same word in the question in the text, this is an example of how the examiners will try to trap you, okay? So you need to look for synonyms and ideas. If the question says large, maybe in the text you'll find this word as enormous, huge, vast. So when you start scanning for those pieces of information, in your mind, make a list of meaning matching words, not only exactly the same words. So, um, let's give an example of how the words, how the text might use synonyms to actually make it more difficult for you to identify um, the answer or the idea. So let's say the text says the vast majority of participants. But in the question, when you read the question, it says most of the people involved. So if you start scanning, having in mind only the words most people involved, you're not going to find it. So that's why you should make a list in your mind of possible synonyms before you start looking for them. Okay. So instead of mass, vast, you can say most, right? You can say the large majority. Instead of people, you can say participants, you can say people who joined, people who answered. Okay, so you need to, um, let's say, enlarge your horizon a little bit in terms of matching words. Okay, here is another example. So the text says, was exorbitantly priced. Okay. And then they're telling you was very expensive in the question. Exorbitant means out of measure, out of proportions. Okay. So which means more than normal. And expensive is more than normal. So when you look at uh when you read the question and you see very expensive, look for words like very pricey, abnormally priced, exorbitantly priced, um, ridiculously priced. Okay, so all these words that refer to the same idea. All right, but the only way they will try to trick you is not just through the usage of synonyms. Okay, they might and they will actually restructure the sentence by changing the grammar or the word order in the sentence. Okay, so let's look at the question. It says Fleming discovered penicillin. So you have a classical subject, verb, object structure, right? So who did it? Fleming. What did he do? He discovered what? Penicillin. What they might do is that they might change the sentence structure and put it into the passive voice, for instance, which is what they did. They said the discovery of penicillin by Fleming. So when you put the keywords in your mind, okay, you add some synonyms first, and then you pay attention to the sentence structure. Okay, they will not They don't have it to say it exactly in the same word order. Let's look at the next one. Hard work is a requirement for success. Success depends on hard work. Now, both of them are active sentences, but in the question, they simply used um, an auxiliary verb. Okay, they said hard work equals requirement for success. But in the other text, they flipped it around. First of all, they brought success at the beginning, and instead of using directly an auxiliary verb, they said it depends on hard work. All right, so let that not trap you. Now, here is a tricky and unfortunately quite classical, typical example of how the examiners might want to trick you or trap you. So let's read the original text. The implementation of stringent regulations led to a notable decline in industrial emotions. All right. Now, I highlighted these words in red, but actually, there are other words that we could have highlighted here, but obviously, we're not going to scan for all the possible words. So you need to filter out what are the keywords that are worth looking for. Okay. Now, here we are presented with two different paraphrases. Let's read them one by one. Strict rules resulted in a significant decrease in factory pollution. B. Stringent regulations led to a decline in industrial emissions. Now, what often happens is that the students, when they do not scan for possible synonyms or related words, and they see the exact same words in the text, they assume it to be true. For instance, look at answer B. Stringent regulations. We see stringent regulations. We see led to a decline. We see that too. And industrial emotions. We see that too. But actually, A is much closer to it. Why? Stringent regulations is written here as strict rules. They are paraphrases of each other. All right. We have decline. We also have decline. Sorry, we have decrease. Similar words. Factory pollution, industrial emission, same thing. However, in a paraphrase, you should never add any comment and you should not remove anything either. But in B, there is something missing. There is something that they removed, which is the word notable. And notable means to a great extent, to a large part, significant. Which is why A is actually the right answer. You really need to be careful about these things. Now, there is another very common trap, which is using antonyms to mislead you. An antonym is the opposite of a synonym. It means to use the opposite word. So let's say that in the text they say far from conclusive. All right. In the text, instead of saying far from conclusive, they might be using something else. They might be saying, for instance,